All right, welcome everyone to the latest installment of our Wednesday walks through Culver history right here at Culver Academy's History Facebook page. I'm Jeff Kenny, Museum and Archives Manager for Culver Academies, and today we're going to be visiting another summer site since it is summer. Speaking of Culver summer schools and camps, this might not immediately jump to your mind as a site of particular significance for the summer. You can see behind me the steeple of the Memorial Chapel, but I'm actually standing in front of the site of the very first Woodcraft Camp. So today we're going to look at the three different sites where the Woodcraft Camp was situated. And of course, that camp goes back to 1912, its very first summer. And it's the third of Culver's three kind of original pillar summer programs, starting in 1902 with the Culver Summer Naval School, followed in 1907 by the Summer Cavalry School, and then of course the School of Woodcraft again opens in 1912. It had its genesis earlier. By even 1911, then Culver, newly minted Culver Superintendent Lee Ginolette, who had been Commandant of Cadets starting in 1897, has plugged into the work of Robert Baden-Powell in England. Baden-Powell is the architect of the international scouting movement that took place in England. So of course the values of that scouting movement of Europe, which is moving its way as of 1910 to the United States in the form, of course, of the Boy Scouts of America, really appeal to Ginolette. And he's also been getting requests for some opportunities for younger boys at that time to attend Culver programs. So he's targeting the 9 to 14-year-old age range, and the idea forms to start the Woodcraft Camp. In fact, in 1911, Ginolette has written a letter to Daniel Carter Beard, who was one of the co-founders and architects of the Boy Scouts of America. And by 1912, Robert Baden-Powell himself, who was passing through the United States and visits only two schools, West Point and Culver Military Academy, comes here and reviews the Corps of Cadets very positively. He and Ginolette, of course, interact. And by that summer, Dan Beard is right here on this campus, in fact, right behind me, conceiving and launching the original Woodcraft program, many of whose values and traits and pillars really continue today in our Woodcraft program. Culver brings in a number of luminaries in the area of scouting and conservation and woodcraft lore over the next several years, including Ernest Thompson Seton. He's an illustrator and a writer whose work has been made into Disney movies. He's also a great conservationist, working with the likes of Teddy Roosevelt. He comes here and helps mold part of the Woodcraft ethos and program. But again, the initial camp, which is just a small handful of 30-some-odd campers, is right behind me in a fairly small space. Of course, we had the cavalry camp a bit to the east of it, occupying that space, those tents. And so these initial Woodcraft tents are in a pretty squeezed spot. The Memorial Chapel, which isn't dedicated to 1951, is not here yet. In fact, the original camp had, after a few years, had its own mess hall, approximately where the Naval Building is located today along the lake shore. And otherwise, in many ways, the camp, of course, utilized the facilities here at Culver's main campus. But by the 1920s, Culver is already pinched for space, primarily because there's a road running in a space that is not a road today, just north of the Woodcraft Camp. And so by the 20s, there's a great need to expand as enrollment is increasing from that original campsite. So we're going to go take a look at the second site, which will probably be familiar to some of you. And we have a very special guest that's going to join us. All right, well, here we are with a special guest. Who you are familiar with if you've been watching these segments, these Wednesday walks. Of course, this is Tony Mayfield, CMA class of 1965, former not only Woodcraft Camp director, but Culver Summer Schools and Camps director for several years. So certainly has a background there. But we're standing near the entryway of the second Woodcraft Camp. Just a quick background on that. Of course, the first camp, as we saw, a little closer to the lake, but really enclosed. So that first camp really is being outgrown. They started with just 30-some campers, and by the time they're approaching 300 in the 1920s, Culver's a little cramped for space. So the school had been really requesting that the road be nudged to the north, and finally by 1929 that happened several hundred yards to the north. State Road 10, Highway 10, to the north of campus here, of course, is run, and that facilitates the space where we're standing to be the second Woodcraft Camp. So, Tony, you have memories, not so much as a camper, but coming here with family.
Yeah, Jeff, first of all, it's great to be back for another Wednesday walk with you. I did not come to camp myself, but I had two brothers that were both in the summer programs, and the first one was here in 1949, 1950. So I honestly can't say I have vivid memories. I was just a little guy. I'm old, but maybe not quite that old. But he was here, and then across the way was the troop camp. And in 1958, I remember that really quite well. And then I came to winter school in 1961. But in '58, my second brother was in the summer troop. But this whole area was summer Culver. I mean, you would pull in, and these, of course, canvas tents and things like this were here. The different signage and things of that nature, and the kind of the whole aura and feel was monumental. Was really significant. It was a special place, and I can remember, again, probably I'm sure from those '50s, being down at the parade field and seeing all that. But my brother was here. And I was here just as a little guy, and I've got a picture with my mom and dad, which in my mind I've always imagined was probably taken, maybe somewhere over where the chapel is, just behind us over here. Really don't know that for sure. But that was the beginning of my own Culver experience, and of course it so happened that I later became the director of the programs. But it's an interesting tie-in, and again, part of that special feeling and aura that makes Culver the great place it is.
Well, and you touched on a couple interesting things. One, of course, if you're a more recent camper, you think cabins. And as you say, these are all wood frames that are then covered with canvas each summer to create these kind of, two section tents? Two boys to a section.
Two boys to a section of the tent, and they would be back to back. There'd be a wall in between and two boys on the back side. Yep. And you had your foot locker, and you pretty much lived out of that foot locker. That was, you of course had your Culver blanket folded at the end of the bed, and your shoe alignment, and just, the regular Culver SOP, so to speak. But that was the beginning.
Right. And I might add, this camp at this site opened, I don't know if I mentioned this, for the first time in the summer of 1930, so right after that highway had been built. And of course the chapel wasn't there, so as you mentioned the chapel, it's dedicated in 1951, so that's a bit of it's a bit more space cramping already for Culver, so the gears are beginning to turn as far as space. I might add though, if you look at the old pictures, which we'll show here, there was a full playground here on this site, besides just, the kind of the camp streets formed by the tents.
Sure, archery and softball games and all kinds of activities, and they would form up and march on over to the rec building or to the dining hall where the meals were served. The chapel, which was either outdoors or probably in the rec building, depending upon conditions, weather conditions, movies, things of that nature. But this was a neat place.
I just might add, also, you mentioned the cavalry camp, of course, kind of behind you, catty-cornered. That may be a little surprising, again, to more recent campers or alums. That was still there into the 90s, I believe.
Yes, yeah, it was, and I was involved with the summer program at that time, and it was, I can see my brother out there spit shining his boots.
That's right. Well, and again, as time moves forward from the time Tony's remembering, what changes things, of course, is enrollment. We get more and more and more campers.
Right.
We're multiple hundreds as we move into the 50s and on towards the early 60s. Now, at this point, the Board of Trustees begins to consider other possible sites. One site that was almost happened was north of us, just across the highway here at the baseball soccer area. Today, this is kind of a flat area without a lot of character, and it still presented the same problem of campers having to cross a highway. Another site that was toyed with a little bit, and plans were actually drawn up, was what's known as the Indian Trails, the little wooded area between the town of Culver and Culver's campus proper. Very high bluffs, kind of enclosed and not conducive to this camp. So they were scratching their heads as to where to put the new, larger Woodcraft camp they needed, and we're going to go to that site and talk about that move. All right, so here we are at the site of the new or current Woodcraft camp as of 1963. As we mentioned before, the trustees had some decisions to make as enrollment's growing there in the early 1960s, and they looked at various sites and the beautiful rolling hills here and topography, and There weren't that many trees, as many as there are today, but they chose this site. And the first prototype cabin was put up in 1962, which happened to be the 50th anniversary of the Woodcraft Camp. And they really faced two dilemmas still with the new camp. One was eating. As Tony mentioned, the dining hall was in close proximity to the second camp, but obviously quite a distance from this current camp, which is east of State Road 117 or East Shore Drive. So behind us is the Woodcraft dining hall that was constructed for the 1963 camp to address that problem. Food for many years was trucked over from the main campus, and then in the 2000s a kitchen was added to this dining hall. And also the matter of crossing a highway, which was a dilemma, as we said, before 1930 for the for camp expansion. That's solved by creating a tunnel under the highway that many of you will be familiar with, that moved everyone east from campus and is still, of course, in use today to safely move Woodcraft campers back and forth to the main camp. So Tony, in 1963 this camp opens up. Just some thoughts and reflections from you on this site.
Well, it's turned out to be a wonderful campsite. There's no question. I've traveled and seen a lot of camps throughout the country, but this particular scene, this particular picture we have here, the Woodcraft headquarters back here, which I occupied for about 11 years, was a great home for me. And really this site was my first introduction to camp. So I'd worked in winter school, been a counselor for 10 years. Anyway, in 1987, I really came out to Woodcraft Camp to be the director. And so for 11 years was here. And as I said, this has been a fabulous site. Of course, they went from the old 2-man tents to a 12-man cabin. And one of the amazing things that campers did over those years was, of course, learn how to share space, learn how to work together, learn how to have that cabin unity and their division or wing unity. That really was the essence of the program. Those early camp leaders did a fantastic job of setting up a program with the bronze, gold, and silver C's and the twigs and branches and all the kind of awards that they had and kept track of. But that was really a wonderful way to motivate kids and to help youngsters find success. And really one of the essences and great pieces of the Woodcraft experience is that really success came at all levels. And a little 9-year-old Woodcrafter could find that as well as a 13, 14-year-old finishing up with leadership positions and so on. But this space was I used to call it the world's biggest backyard, because in the evenings you could see kids out here, or throughout the day, taking classes and participating, but in the evenings just the camaraderie, talking to each other, throwing frisbees around. We'd have march downs and military kind of things out here, and of course the military parades on Thursday, retreat parades on Thursday evenings was a classic. Everybody looked forward to that, and there was a certain amount of tension as your unit, wing division, tried to compete and win those flags and pennants and so on. But again, really everything was kind of right here. But this was the Woodcraft experience, and I think this camp was really a very unique, rewarding, and just a great experience for the kids over the years.
Yeah, and I might add, one thing that the expansion facilitated was bringing girls into the program in 1977, initially under Janet Stannard, who later Janet Klein, who becomes the first woman to be the camp director later years. But as Tony referenced, if you're watching this and you're wondering, are we going to go look at this particular building or Cardinal Creek or whatever, we do plan a future segment in this series to kind of walk through the camp a little bit more and look at some of the individual buildings and their history. Today we really wanted to focus on the locations of the camp moving to this beautiful site. Well, great, thank you Tony for being here. Again, Tony Mayfield, class of 65. Join us again. This has been Wednesday Walks Through Culver History. I'm Jeff Kenny, Culver Academy's Museum and Archives Manager, and we're here every Wednesday at 4 o'clock on Culver Academy's History Facebook page. Also, head on over to digitalvault.culver.org and click Films, and you can get not only a lot of historic film of summer and boarding school material, but also these films, these video shorts are archived there if you want a more permanent link or a non-Facebook link. So again, Wednesday Walk Through Culver History. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.